So welcome to today's event. We got a super exciting one today. Anthony, AJC Web Dev. I actually don't know your last name, Anthony.
Campolo.
That's
Yeah,
right,
Anthony
Campolo.
Campolo. Yeah. Yeah. It's all good.
Your Twitter your last name doesn't start with at. Yeah, we're doing a really fun thing today. Anthony is part of the core team over at RedwoodJS and is demonstrating for us how RedwoodJS kind of automates a lot of your kind of visual testing of components and how it hooks into Redwood and all the cool stuff you can do, because it's like not just Storybook, it's like Storybook on crack. So Anthony, why don't you take it away? Tell us what we're doing today.
Alrighty. Thanks a lot, Michael. Great to be here again. We've been kind of building this up over many months, and so this is like one of my favorite places to kind of come and give presentations and hang out with y'all. And we're going to be, as Michael said, talking about Storybook. And we're going to be talking about the workflow of building a component with Storybook. So we kind of call it building a component the Redwood way. And the idea being that with Storybook, you can have a lot of visibility into what your component looks like in its different states and all that sort of stuff. So we can kind of just dive right into it, because talking about it is a little theoretical, but what's cool is it's a very visual thing. So let's go ahead and let me close all this stuff up. So all I've got going on right now is I got us started off with the Redwood tutorial. So this is like kind of the end state of the first Redwood tutorial where you build out a blog. And so we're just copying that. And then we're going to get our database set up with just some basic little seed data. So this first is going to generate the client and set up migrations. And then we're going to do, and these commands actually have been deprecated as of yesterday. So, but don't worry too much about that. All the other Storybook stuff is going to be the same. Just make sure to actually follow the actual Redwood tutorial when you're using these commands. And that's how you'll get the most current, most up-to-date stuff. And this is going to open up our project on localhost 8910. And we'll see just kind of our basic Redwood homepage. And since we're streaming, everything is a little bit sluggish, but for the most part, this usually goes pretty quickly. I also have like a 7-year-old computer, which is super duper fun. All right, so here we go. This is the Redwood blog. So that looks pretty nice.
Hot.
And then, yeah, well, let's go ahead and get our project open over here. So let's do this. Let me get this over here on one side, and then we'll get this over here. And if anyone wants to see the kind of repo that I'm going off of, this is my GitHub, AJC Web Dev, and lunch-storybook-test. This is kind of what I usually do for all my talks. I'll write out just a little script of kind of what I'm going to be going over. Okay, so right now we have our project. If you're not familiar at all with a Redwood project, we have a front end and a back end. So we're going to be working, I think, mostly in the web front end folder. And this is our home page that we're looking at over here. So right now we're getting our blog posts cell is what we're looking at. And a cell is just a way for React to do, or for Redwood to do data fetching. So if you've never seen a GraphQL query before, this is a GraphQL query. We're asking for the posts, and we're asking for the ID, title, body, and created at date of those posts. And then we also have the 4 states that our data can be in. It can be loading, it can be empty, we can get a failure, in which case it gives us this error message, or success. And so the success state is what we're looking at over here. And it's mapping over our posts and then giving us this blog post component and feeding in the post. But yeah, no, I've never gotten Zoom bombed before. Now I understand what's happening.
Yeah, I get it. Now I see what's happening when people are just trying to teach a class in like school,
Yeah.
to like
It's just because
apologize.
people are just trying to take us down. It's Redwood's too cool. People are like, we got to stop them. We need to stop them from teaching everyone how to code in a more simple and comprehensible way.
Tom, you have a much more spammy audience than I do, I guess.
Man, I guess I had no idea. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good. It seems like we're good. Let's see if we can move forward.
All right, I'll try to keep catching them if I see anything come up. Sorry about that.
Never know what's gonna happen. All right, so this should be pretty easy to kind of understand if you've ever seen a React component before. We've got our blog post component, which is taking in the posts. And then for each post, it's going to create an article. That article will have a header. Inside that header is going to be the post title, which is what you're looking at right there. And then the post body, which is what we're looking at right there. Now, this is pretty cool, but what we can also do is we can take a look at this in Storybook. So let's get our Storybook going. Our Storybook command is going to be yarn redwood storybook. All of our commands start with yarn redwood. And what this is going to do is this is going to open up Storybook on localhost. I think it's 7910, I believe. It's going to pop up on the screen at the bottom in a second. And for anyone who's never used Storybook before, it's going to take all of our components and just kind of show us like an example of what it looks like with data in it. So for each of our components, we have a corresponding Storybook file. And if you look at, so this is the Storybook file right here. And we're exporting this variable called generated, which is returning our blog post component, which is what we were just looking at. And then it's got some dummy data in here. And then you export it with a title. And what's really cool is Redwood is set up so that when you use your generate commands to generate a page or a component or anything like that, it's also going to generate a Storybook file. Let's get this up over here, actually. So this is now our Storybook, and we're going to have a panel on the side that's going to, actually, let me switch these over. There we go. That's what I wanted. Cool. So this is Storybook right here. Now, you have on the left here, components, cells, layouts, and pages. This is pretty similar to just our general folder structure. We have pages, layouts, and we have components, except now we also have cells. And so what's cool about cells, as I was saying, we have these different states they can be in. So right now, this is the success state, and we're seeing both of our posts. So it's mapping over the posts. And if we say, okay, but what if we got an error? So we can just go click that and see what our error is. So we didn't have to actually feed in an actual error to see what you're going to get from that. And then same with the empty and the loading states. So if you want to design your little loading spinner, or you wanted to have, a funny little error message or empty message or anything like that, you can do that all in Storybook. And it's very easy to see what's what. And
this is fascinating. Could I pause you for a second?
Everyone feel free to jump in at any time, like always.
Okay, so this is it, for very little so far, very little effort so far. We have something that would have taken a considerable amount of effort if I was just to do it on my own. And to be honest, I'm not even sure I would have the tools to kind of provide these stories like very easily, like for the loading, empty, and failure state. So I'm curious, could you tell us a little bit more about like the whole cell notion? Because it seems like super fascinating that you have all these states in a very isolated way right out of the box.
Totally. And this is what comes with having nice conventions that we can all agree on. And a cell is nothing crazy. It's just a convention for data fetching. So as a React developer, you've probably written many data fetching components a lot like this, except you are doing a whole bunch of conditionals to say, if you get the success, you should do this. If you get an error, here's how you handle your error message. If it's still loading, here's what you do with your loading state. So the Redwood team just said, we don't want to have to keep doing this over and over again. So let's create a kind of shared declarative way to do data fetching. So it's just I believe it's just a higher order component that's exporting each of these different states. And that's pretty much all it is. So it's not really doing anything crazy. And if you want to like dive through the source code, it should make a lot of sense. And this is what you get out of the box with every cell. So every cell is going to have all of these. And all you do is you write the query for the exact data you want that cell to return. And then you write what you want the success state to do. And then you can customize these three if you want, or you can just leave them as defaults and they'll at least function as your kind of minimum viable data fetching. And so that's kind of the cell idea. It's one of the things that Redwood developers are really big on. And I know that for me personally, anytime I'm working not in Redwood, I'm always like, I wish I had cells. And it's just a nice convention to have. So does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah. I guess I'm so used to seeing this happen inside of like one block of code, right? So you have your component and then you'll have some kind of conditional or like, ternary statements in there that'll be like, if it's loading, if it's success, if it's all this stuff. But having it split out in these named exports is really beautiful. And you can see almost immediately the value of this when you can split those stories out. That's very cool.
Yeah, totally. This is what's cool about now having all this storybook stuff completed, is that this is all kind of part of the larger vision of Redwood from the beginning, but all the pieces haven't really been in place because it had to be built up. And this is what the second tutorial is really good about, is kind of what I'm walking you through right now is going to be the storybook portion of the newer Redwood tutorial. And so we can start getting into this. So this is our blog post. I'm not sure if I actually changed anything here. I think this is just the same thing. And let's see, did that change anything? Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, cool. So that's just our beginning starting point. Okay, so what we are gonna actually, let me also pull up the actual Redwood tutorial so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So redwoodjs.com has got everything you'll ever need for Redwood. You got tutorial 1 over here, and then you got tutorial 2 down here. Redwood's Revenge. I also like calling it the Redwoodening. So this is the beginning of the tutorial. And this is kind of the prerequisite. So some of the stuff we already talked about, where we kind of talked about what cells are. And then this is all the other stuff you go over in the first tutorial, which you don't really need to worry about too much. These were the instructions we did to start. You also notice how these are slightly different commands right now, because this is, we have moved to Prisma Migrate. None of that is particularly relevant to this talk, though. Okay, cool. So, okay, there we go. All right, so this is gonna be our first story. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we are going to take our components, and what we want to do is we want to just render a small little summary on the front page. So if we look at our blog post cell, we're getting 2 things right now. And if we look at our home page, we see this is what the cell is. So the cell is imported onto the home page, but we don't want to get all of this. We want this to just be a short little explanation of what's going on. I need to close that.
Is this like a hipster ipsum or something? I see LaCroix.
Hey, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, that's I think that was Rob. So this is what we're going to do first. We're going to create this truncate function. And the truncate function is just going to take the text of the blog post and it's going to shorten it to whatever length we want to provide. And then it's going to stick this little ... on the end. And that's going to go right at the top of our blog post JS right here. So we're going to go there and there, and that's going to go there. And then we're going to bring it in down here in the div. So now instead of showing the post body, we want to show this little summary. And so we're going to grab that. Okay, so now if we look over here, let's see if that does the thing. All right, summary is not defined. So that is because we have to actually define the summary now in our story. So if we go over to our blog posts story, we're going to have the blog post normal, and that's why we're going to set it to full right here. And then we're also going to have the blog post where summary is set to true, and that will then be a summary. So let's grab that and put that all in there. And so
you need the summary prop passed to the component.
Yeah. Just so we got that. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So now we're going to go back to the blog post component and import the. Actually, sorry. I kind of created like some shorthand notes for this, but and I realized that I haven't gone through this as many times as I probably should have. Okay, cool. So
we're all friendly
okay,
here.
cool.
You've seen me on the struggle bus, like.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So what'd you say? What am I missing right now, Rob?
Line 7 there. You gotta decompose the summary prop coming in, and the list of props there. I can't draw on the screen, but line 7.
Yeah. Line 7, right? Yeah. Oh,
Yep.
oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So this is what I'm missing right here. Okay. Yeah. So I only grabbed this bottom part here. Yeah. So we have to actually start it off letting it know that summary is set to false, and then also it has the prop at all. So that should do it. Yeah, this is one of the really nice things about the tutorial docs, and why I always try and recommend people actually stick with the tutorial docs, because they actually kind of highlight what's being changed within the thing. That's why I immediately bailed on my notes that I wrote down there. All right, so now if we look over here, we now have full, which is the full blog post, and we also have summary, which is the ... with that right there. So that's good, but it's not being brought in yet to our blog cell. So that is going to be the next thing we want to do. Cool. So now we want to actually display the summary within the cell. So if you look in our cell now, we need to pass in that summary there. So we're going to go on over to our blog posts cell, and we're going to grab that, and we're going to do that. And if we look over here to success, that should do that. And so now we see we've got that for our cell. And then this is our cells being brought into our home page. You now see that our home page is also displaying those little summaries. So that is cool. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to build a component in what's called the Redwood way. So build a component the Redwood way. This is a crazy obscure joke that only French Canadians will get. And and also in the actual docs, it kind of bumps you between testing and Storybook, just to kind of focus us on the Storybook part. I'm going to kind of skip over the testing, but the two are kind of integrated together if you're actually going through this tutorial. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to use this yarn redwood generate command. You have yarn redwood generate commands for almost everything you'd want to generate in a Redwood project. And we're going to generate a component called comment. And let's get another terminal going over.
Yeah, we should say the first part of the tutorial, you basically build a blog, but it's sort of kind of read only. And then the second part, now you add a comment engine so people can actually comment on the blog posts. So that's what he's doing here.
That's right. So now we have this comment, and then we should have the comment over. So first, let's see. Okay, yeah, and I believe last time I ended up having issues until I restarted my server. So that is just one thing. I think it's when you create new files or new folders is usually when my dev servers tend to get confused. So I think that's all that's going on here. So let's kick yarn Redwood dev back on over here. And then we'll get the storybook running over here. Okay, oh, wait, let's probably restart that sucker. Let's see, how's this guy doing?
And you'll see here as it goes, like the benefit of doing this in Storybook is, right, normally if you didn't have Storybook, you'd have to build the comment component, you'd have to put it in the blog post component, you'd have to hook up the data, you'd have to hook up the database, you have to get all this working just to refresh the page and see if your component works, your new comment component. But here he's going to do it in Storybook, and you can kind of do each piece like in isolation in Storybook and see what it looks like right away without hooking up the data or anything. And then you can hook up the data, see what it looks like. You can hook it up into the main blog post, see what it looks like. And you can do it like iteratively instead of having to do everything all at once before you can see anything happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, it's all about like this really kind of nice developer workflow. Like Redwood thinks a lot about, DX developer experience. I've kind of talked about this with other people is that, I think every developer has different like pain thresholds of like how obnoxious their tooling can be. And some people have a very high pain threshold, some people have a very low pain threshold. And some people's pain threshold is so low, like Tom, he will spend years building a framework entirely based around developer experience. And that's kind of what we all get to benefit from is this like really, really nice, well done developer experience because it was really thought of from first principles as the thing you want to aim for. And then the framework was kind of like built around these ideas of how do we actually get the kind of development workflow that we want to get. And so I think it's a pretty cool way to think about how to do all this. So now you see over here, we've actually got this comment going on, and this is just your blank component that gets generated with a little H2 and a little hello paragraph. All right. And
so may I hop in here with a quick question?
Sure.
So you're using properties to pass data around, which is a good, it's a fundamental habit. And I may be getting ahead of myself, but I'm pondering, say, effects. Say if you're grabbing data from a use effect hook, where, I see it feels easy to test components where you only get data via props. And hence you should do your best to only pass data as props. And those because in this groove we hear a lot, we should write code that's easy to test. And if we're writing code that's easy to test or use and see in Storybook, then it's got to be pretty good code, good habits.
That's
but what about?
That's a good question. I think that the idea being that because your Storybook, it's like they are just components at the end of the day. So I'm guessing like the effects are going to happen within Storybook. Someone who's maybe Rob or if Tom's still around, someone who's done more Storybook may be able to answer that question better.
I don't think I've done any use effect stuff within Storybook, but it should work. I mean, they're isolated in kind of their own little world there. So I believe use effect and stuff will still work unless it depends on like some kind of global state that isn't available. Then you get into more complex situations. I don't know how far Anthony's going to get in this one, but we do some stuff where you're getting some data from like external files and stuff. But
well, in the Storybook, pardon me if I haven't dipped my toe in this yet, so it's new. The Storybook, say, file is populating, say, default data for you, or you're doing that. And
so this is the Storybook file we're looking at right now, and so all it is just importing the comment component, which is which is this. So right now it doesn't have any dummy data in it, but the other one we were doing, it had this right here, so it's feeding in this kind of mock post right now.
Sure, right on. So that prop data that you're passing in, you're you're feeding in right there. Got it. I guess was a little wrapped around the axle. The cell has this concept of grabbing data from wherever and then presenting it in different states. But that grabbing data from wherever is really not part of the story, it seems. It's once you have it, present it in this way or that.
That is an interesting distinction, Keith. And I think, if I may, it seems like these are very much the kind of the visual tests, and that maybe those other like tests that are going to test the whole workflow of like actually fetching data and whatnot would be in maybe some other type of test harness, like a end-to-end type of test environment.
Yeah, the problem is just like testing anything that's not your project in general. Like there's always kind of philosophical discussions about it.
Sure.
Like should you try and mock it to the greatest extent you can, or should you actually just test the outside system, especially as we're getting into this whole kind of serverless Jamstack world where we're relying on all these like third-party APIs and services. The kind of question of like, how do you test this stuff is really complicated. Mm-hmm. So we've kind of come up with a lot of good conventions around testing, Storybook, and mocking, and we've kind of integrated all of them into like a unified workflow that should hopefully get your whole Redwood project working and functioning and having good tests that you can continue like run and build on. And then for me personally, like my own philosophy is like, I'm always going to test with the actual third-party APIs running. Like I will try to not mock as much as possible, because I just think it just makes more sense to actually test the real system to as much as you can. So I'm not really concerned so much with like testing effects so much as testing my whole project in isolation. And then, as Michael said, doing some sort of end-to-end test where you actually integrate the third-party stuff.
Gotcha. So, but like to Keith, to your question, it seems like this is primarily for, and almost provides like a boundary, like you were saying, to have these just be prop-driven components. And then with the exception of, there's some interesting stuff happening with the cells and the way that those are being exported. But that these are mostly just kind of like testing the varied states of like a prop driven component.
Cool. Okay, cool. Thanks for that detour. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And the cells are completely separate from Storybook. That's totally a Redwood concept. But what we're going to do now is we're actually going to build out this little comment component. So we're going to take that and that. So now we're going to be bringing in comment name, created at, and comment body. And that's what we're expecting. So right now we don't have the name property. So you see that right there. So now we're going to go back into our comment stories, and we're going to populate it with just a little comment here. Our own Rob Cameron hanging out with y'all right now.
In the flesh.
Gotta plug myself in my tutorials.
Totally.
I mean, people gotta know who wrote them.
They do. It's important. This stuff don't write itself.
I like to think
people.
It's a team effort. But I'll sneak in little Easter eggs there with my name in them.
It is, but it's so cool to make it personal. I think things are better when they're personal. It's a way to make it personal.
Agreed.
I agree. And this is what I would do when I would write my own tutorials. I would just, whatever project I'm building, the first thing I would do is I would change the H1 to just say AJC Web Dev. Like, in case you're wondering, this is AJC Web Dev. Okay. So this is now, we're looking at this data. So we're feeding in this comment into the comment component in our Storybook generated thing, which is over here. So that is all good. Now what we want to do is we want to format this date. So we got this little helper function right here that's taking our date time that's getting passed in using the date object or constructor or whatever the new keyword thing does. I don't use it very often. And set that to parsed date. And then we're going to take that and do the to locale string and then basically parse out the date with the month and the year and all that goodness. Did you copy paste this from somewhere, Rob, or did you just write that?
I'm sure I had a half a dozen windows open to Stack Overflow for various JavaScript date formatting. Yeah. I have to look it up from scratch every time. It's so complicated.
Wait, I'm in the wrong place.
There are libraries that make it easier, like the date functions, date FNS.
Date FNS,
like,
yeah.
That's the new one that everyone uses, yeah. But I wanted to keep it just kind of plain JavaScript for this.
Yeah. That is
Yeah,
always
that's
nice
probably
in these
a good
tutorials
idea.
to not have to install something just to see the example.
Well, okay, that should be all you need to do there. So we're making the date look a little nicer, and then we also added some styling as well. So you see all these class names and whatnot. You're probably thinking, hey, it looks like Tailwind. Or you're thinking, hey, what's all that junk in your HTML? It's probably one or the other. And this is, Tailwind is, a nice way to kind of write a bunch of little shorthand classes that give you these nice little styles right here. And what we want to do, though, is we want to, actually first we're going to, yes, we want to add a little margin around it, but we don't want to add the margin into the actual component because we want to have our storybook just look a little nicer. And what we're going to do is we're just going to pop in that little margin for here into our storybook story over here. Again. And then when we do that, it's just going to space this out a little bit for us so that we can see it and kind of what it will look like when it's actually being displayed within our project. Alrighty, and then that's the test. So let's skip that. That's all good. That's all good. Format date, add styling, and then add margin to the story. Great. All right, now we're gonna bring in, we wanna have multiple comments. So we're going to now generate a comments cell. So we first generated a comments component. Now we're gonna do comments cell. The cell being what we were looking at before, which does our data fetching for us. And that's going to be created in our components folder over here. So comments cell looks much like our other cell that we were just looking at. And what we need to do is we need to import our comment into our comments cell. So this is our comment component that we were just looking at right here. We're going to import that into our cell. And then we're going to update our query to include basically all of the comment information, the ID, the name, the body of the comment, and then create that date. And then in success, we are going to return the comment with the ID set to key, and then pass the comment through. And I think that's going to be, might be it.
If anyone's ever like confused when to use a component and when to use a cell, usually it's, if you ever think I need to get data from the database and display it, then you go cell, because cell handles these different loading states and empty states and failure states. Otherwise, it's just a regular React component.
I might need to restart my server again. Cannot wait to get a new computer, guys. You have no idea.
So something like a layout that's maybe just going to compose the various pieces of data wouldn't necessarily need to be a cell if it's just kind of wrapping things that are fetching data with like a nice layout. That could just be like a component, and then you can keep your cells for like the actual post content.
We have a layout. We have a layout specifically for like page layouts. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of separated out as a separate thing in Redwood, or if you just mean like the kind of layout of the component itself, that's kind of different though.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just thinking about examples of things that would just be components versus like an actual like a cell. Yeah, that was the first one that came to mind.
Okay.
Yeah, like if your layout had some custom data in it, like something in your header was something coming out of the database, I mean, you could manually, there's a hook, use query, so you could go to GraphQL and get that data even in the layout without using a cell. Yeah, it'd be a little more work, but you could do it that way, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the cool thing about having all these conventions in Redwood is that they're all just kind of abstractions, but the libraries are still in there. So if you ever want to just drop down and just use Apollo, you can always do that. You don't really have to go through the Redwood conventions necessarily. It's similar with like Prisma. Like if you say, hey, I don't really like ORMs, then you can just get rid of your ORM, and that's fine. Redwood won't really care or complain at all. One of the things that I really like about it. And what's cool about cells also is you're going to get one other additional thing created with it, which is going to be this mock file. So we have our stories file like before, but we also have this mock as well. And Rob, are we using MSW for this mock service worker?
Yeah, that's kind of what's intercepting. When the cell tries to go out to GraphQL, MSW sneaks in there and says, nope, return what's in this file instead.
Interesting.
Very cool. Sweet. Okay.
That's cool.
Sure.
So that's like the little bit of magic I was so curious about. So yeah, neat.
Yeah. So in that case, in the data, right? Yeah, we handle that we have a little kind of hooks, not in Storybook itself, but I guess in that GraphQL layer displayed through Storybook, we're sneaking in there and intercepting that data to give you a little nicer experience.
Tasteful magic.
Tasteful magic. Is that mswjs.io?
Say it again. You cut out there.
Oh, sorry. Is that mswjs.io? Is that where the?
I believe so.
Let me guess. So yeah, I think there's not really any libraries
mock
called
service worker.
MSW. Yeah, should be it. Yeah, I know Matt Siskowski works on mock service worker a little bit.
So you won't see any of that MSW sort of interface in the Storybook stuff. It's just all handled transparently for you, but it is there if you wanted to write something manually that uses MSW. It is available.
Okay, so back on track here. So all I did here now was after I got this comment cell created, we have this mock folder here, and we are exporting the comments, and then we have these two fake comments right here. So the other comment we were looking at before, Rob Cameron, first comment, and then David Price, second comment. We have a similar issue though, which is the margin. We want to add a little bit of margin there, but this time we actually want to do this in the cell, not in the Storybook, because what we're looking at here, this is what we're actually going to see displayed on wherever we display our cell. So we want to make sure that we have this looking nice and good. So let's go down. And... Sweet. So we're adding in a little margin here, and then sticking the comment now inside this div with that margin. So this is going to be our success state inside of our comment cell. And then when we update that, we now see we had a little margin added in between. And it was just margin top. So there's kind of adds some space in between, but we still want the kind of margin on the sides like we had before. So that we are going to add the margin to our story. So that doesn't mess with the component itself. So this comments cell down in success, which is this thing right here.
Yeah, again, the magic here is like he's building these components that require data from the database, but he's doing it in Storybook and doesn't need a database yet. Like he can design this whole thing without the database yet. It's amazing.
It is really amazing because you do have, I think this is something that I'm so attracted to with Redwood is you have, there's a very real constraints sometimes that make it so that the development team has to go off and do its thing and the design team has to go off and do its thing. And a lot of times like React lives in that space where they come together, and there haven't been a lot of good tools that allow you to like work on this part that requires both pieces in like a cogent, sensible way. And I feel like, one of the really great developer experiences, as you talk about, that's achieved in Redwood is that it kind of defines that third space of like, you got back end, you got like pure front end, but then there's this space in the middle where like people need to collaborate in the meantime. And like seeing it come together like this is really, really, really nice.
Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our blog post component, and we're going to import this comments cell that we just created. So now within our blog posts, we will actually see the cells. So we are going to go there, over there, over there. That's all good. And then we'll see our blog post. So now we see we have these comments in our blog post component.
And the magic there is, right, even though the Storybook is showing you the component uses the cell, and our stuff still kicks in, even though it's like a subcomponent of the component you're displaying. Our stuff, the MSW stuff, kicks in and still intercepts that GraphQL call and shows you the mocked comments. Even though that's not the cell you're viewing here, you're viewing its parent. It still goes down through a chain of cells and still gets mocked.
Super duper cool. Now we're going to use this decorators thing so that just all of our stories have that margin that we want. And this is where we're exporting it. So we're exporting the title, but we're also going to export this little decorator as well. So this is just kind of showing you a little trick you can do with Storybook to get that kind of margin that you want to get.
Oh, nice, because you had applied that initially just to the example, but now you can apply it to all of them universally.
Yeah, so now any story that is going to come through this is going to get that margin. So this is kind of like how you can like nest components within components, because Storybook is just a component. You can do the same thing. So you can kind of nest that in there as well.
That's really nice, because I see a lot of documentation for UI libraries that they'll use just the you go to copy an example and it has all of this like layout attached to it as well. So having that separate, being able to apply that, but then not have to see it in the story is nice.
Yeah. And we want to now add a little bit of gap between. So you see right now our comment is like right up against our blog post there. So we're going to go back into our blog post component and add some margin around the comments cell, which is, so yeah, that's good, that's good. Cool.
You see, he's doing a lot of formatting stuff, and this is just my style of writing the tutorial. Like, I could just give you a whole bunch of HTML and just be like, just copy and paste this and don't worry about what it does. But I kind of want to explain every single step. So something isn't just magically changing, and you're supposed to accept that that's the way it works. Like, you're seeing why I'm doing that and how to actually do it in each step.
Yep.
Yeah, this is like one of the biggest things about the tutorial, and why I think it's so important, is that it walks you through kind of each step of what your workflow is actually going to be like. So yeah, like you said, we just give you all this code and be like, here you go, and go look at it. But it's about this kind of sequence of showing you like, all right, how would you actually build something in the Redwood way? And sweet, that's it. All right, so that is our component that we built with our comments. Any questions?
I do have a question. So for people, so I actually use Storybook quite a bit. I was actually in it right before this meeting. But I'm curious, for anyone who is unfamiliar with Storybook as a tool, kind of what's the what's the notion there? What's the like value in using Storybook?
Velocity, I think, is the idea of like, think about, like Rob was saying, how much time you spend fiddling with your setting up your database and getting your components in the right state and all that kind of stuff. Is it kind of just spits it all out for you. What I thought was really cool the first time I used this was the way I liken it. It was like that moment in Wizard of Oz when Dorothy opens the door and it goes from like black and white to color. So it's just like, you were dealing with like all this, React code that was all super, super confusing. And then it's just like, can I just see what like all this stuff actually looks like, and then you just like hit a button and then it's all there and you can just kind of go through it. So I think it's a really powerful tool for beginners. And it's unfortunate that these types of tools require so much work and configuration to get going, because then the people I think who would benefit most from them have a hard time actually getting access to them. So that's also why we wanted to really integrate it into the framework. So for people learning Redwood can also have this Storybook tool as well.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to ask, kind of my unexplored idea of of Storybook. I haven't used it professionally yet. Is kind of that it helps a lot with like if you have different permissions or roles or user levels or something like that. Does that integrate with Redwood as well? Or as far as like my previous job, we would have people from different branches or different levels of users, and then they would have we would have to test it by having test users and logging out, logging back in, going to the page, which was a massive pain. Does Redbook kind of or Storybook kind of take care of that?
Yeah, so I think Rob can speak more to this, but we have auth integrated into Redwood itself. So I think that's why you probably will be able to do that, I think, with Redwood and Storybook. But I don't think that's really because of Storybook. I think that's more so because of how we have hooks that manage the user state. Is that correct, Rob?
Yeah, Storybook doesn't really care about authentication or whatever, but we have a bunch of little helpers in there that do it for you. So you'll see if Anthony was to keep going in the tutorial, the next step is we add like a moderation feature. So if you have a certain role when you're logged in, you can delete comments. So then in Storybook, you can see, okay, if the person's logged in, what does the comment look like? If they're logged in as a moderator, does the button show? And you have all these states right in Storybook. So you just click through them all and see, yep, everything is behaving as expected.
That's beautiful. Wow.
Yeah. Now, if you didn't have Redwood, to answer your question, Rob, I think as long as the components were architected in such a way that those are props to the component, you should easily be able to compose stories from those. And that is like the killer place for that, right? Because like ghosting into someone else's account with different privileges is a pain in the ass in like every system that I've ever used. So yeah, that is like a really choice case for that.
Yeah, totally. So our auth stuff, we don't usually pass through as props. We have like a hook, use auth. And then behind the scenes, it's going to figure out if you're authenticated or not and gives you a bunch of like functions like is authenticated, is logged in, is logged out. So we can mock all of that for Storybook. So rather than having to pass through who the user is down through your component chain as props, it's just you'll use a hook in the component that you care about. And we let you mock that result of that hook in that particular story.
Very cool.
Sweet. Thanks so much for being here, Rob. Super huge help as always.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thanks.
Yeah, it's nice to meet the man behind the name in the tutorial.
The man behind the typos. We get like typo fixes for the tutorial like every day.
Then people get their first PRs in then that way.
I know, it's great.
That's true.
It's great. Got to start hiding them in there
two.
just so people have those opportunities. Anthony, awesome as always. I really appreciate you sharing these cool things with us, and just kind of like what's happening in Redwood, but particularly this overlap is really neat, because I mean, it really does focus on the developer experience that we're all kind of have a lot of pain around right now, which is that like kind of like collaborative handoff, like design to component to data handoff. And so it's really cool to see what you're doing. Did you have any parting words?
No, just thanks as always, Michael. So such a huge fan of everything you do and all the stuff you put together here. So I always enjoy the opportunity to get out and share some knowledge and hang out with all you guys. So we got a couple new faces as well, which is always really cool. So hope to see you hang out in the Discord as well.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks everybody for being here. If you don't have a question that kind of comes up to you later, I mean, you can always ping anyone in the Discord, and we'd be happy to kind of follow up and make sure that you get pointed to the right place. As always, the Redwood docs are fantastic, and I think probably going through this tutorial would provide a lot of insights into both Redwood and Storybook. So, yeah, thanks for your time, everybody. Good to see all your faces.